very lucky in high school that I went to. We had an enormous tech wing where they taught all the trades, and it was right out of that you could just go and get a job at Stelco, Tabasco, Harvester. The industry in Hamilton was just booming, and so there was no thoughts of what am I going to do with myself. I went right to work for a company that did HVAC. I had HVAC in my high school, which was a very unusual situation. There were very few. We actually built from grade 9 to grade 12 our own refrigerators. We had all the teachers were tradespeople. They were generating people to work in the trades and in the industry. So that's kind of been pushed off to the side, and I think that's why we're where we are now with a shortage of tradespeople. But anyway, I spent 13 years there. I served my apprenticeship. I got my refrigeration license. I also got my gas and propane and oil ticket. And the only problem that I had with my job, which I really, really liked, was, and I should say, one of the first things I did was install heat pumps in about 1975. And if you remember, I had to go look this up because I remember the oil embargo was, I believe, in 1973. And the government came with a program of get off oil. So they were subsidizing and encouraging people to get off oil and put electric heat in their homes. So everybody was putting electric furnaces in, baseboard heaters in brand new homes, as well as retrofit. And so the company I worked for did a lot of high-end work on houses that were not in suburbia. They were out in the country on acreages. And people were putting heat pumps in. And the heat pumps were made by Westinghouse, GE, Lennox, Carrier. And they were all, of course, designed and built in Canada, or at least in North America. They were very problematic, and it was the affluent people that could afford to put them in and service them. They needed a lot of service. Everything was mechanical on these heat pumps. The principles were the same, but they didn't have the technology to function efficiently and reliably. They're much like an older car, like a 1970s car, where you'd be doing tune-ups and it was just like your cars now were really, sometimes we complain, but they're very reliable. I know, but it's not like the old days. When it was cold, you'd see people out with the hood up, and they'd be sticking a screwdriver in the carburetor and dumping fuel down, and it was an event whenever that happened. But anyways, where was I going? The problem with my job was that I couldn't get time off in the summer, and I wanted a cottage. So I had an opportunity to work for the local school board, and because the schools mostly are empty, there was no one to complain. So they wanted me to take my holidays in the summer. So I went to work for the school board for 29 years. And we had 80 buildings to look after. I couldn't look after them all, but I was the first HVAC guy that they had hired because they started to air condition their buildings. So what I ended up doing was doing more supervising the contractors that were coming in to make repairs. After that, I sort of transitioned into teaching at Mohawk, and I really enjoyed it, and it went along with it. I did art all the way along as well. So what I've sort of got here is the HVAC was my business and the art was my hobby, and now it's turned around. My art is my business and my HVAC is my hobby. I'm still very interested in the technology and what's happening. So I think I could go on a week, blah 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 blah, but I don't think that's going to help you. I want to ask you people what a few questions. Does anybody here have a heat pump now? Okay. Has anybody here got a heat pump or had a heat pump in the past and now they don't? A few. Did you have a bad experience, or that just pooped out and you just went another route, or hard to say?
So the one that I had was in my parents' house. I talked them into getting it
Yes.
in the early 80s.
Right.
And like you say, it just pooped out. It was okay. They were really happy with it. Prior to that, I was the jerk son, and after that, I was the genius son.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it eventually wore out.
Okay. Well, the problem with as I put, the older ones had a lot of mechanical issues. The timers, the sensors were antiquated, and everything. They just could not tighten up the efficiency to make them reliable or as efficient as they could be. And when the temperature got low, they used to, it was a function of them to shut off at about 5 degrees below. And then you would switch over to your alternate heat, whether it be oil or gas or electricity. And that was normal. The technology now has come so far that we don't really need backup heat. I'm not to say it doesn't struggle. Your heat pump's not going to struggle air to air. If it gets down to -30, it's going to struggle because there's not as much heat outside. Now, I think it's worth just going back to this was part of the ODP course, which was the ozone depletion course. I think we all remember the ozone problem. It's still with us. But the refrigerants that we were using was responsible for doing a lot of damage to the ozone. We put it in spray cans, spray your hair, you know, and they got rid of that. And so the refrigeration industry had to change. And when I started in the business, if you had an air conditioner or a heat pump, a refrigerator, whatever, if something failed on it, you would just open up the system and let the refrigerant go into the atmosphere. That was an accepted practice. We weren't doing anything wrong. It was touted as a safe gas that you could breathe. You couldn't live on it, but you could breathe it and it wouldn't kill you. However, there's a lot of HVAC guys have heart issues because of breathing it in. And but that didn't happen till down the road, like so many things. So when we were concerned about the ozone, the industry started to have to collect the refrigerant and bottle it and give it back to the thing and start controlling it. So you had to take this OTP course, which was a day-long course back in the 80s, late 80s. In order to get a card that says you were certified, and then you could go and purchase refrigerant. So this is part of that course. It had to be updated because, unfortunately, the refrigerants that they replaced are now good for the ozone, but they're global. They have global warming potential. So now we're going to have to change again. So if you're into conspiracy theories, you know, there's one you can work with. But anyway, so this is I'm just going to flip through these because there's a point to this, but some of this information you probably know, and what these old refrigerants did, how they destroyed the ozone. They would go up in the atmosphere, they would stay there and destroy it for a long, long time. I have a chart later on here. This explains it. And of course, we understood that without the ozone, we're going to cook all our crops, skin cancer. It wasn't a good thing. It's the chlorine atom that is the nasty thing. And now this refrigerant here, when I started in the trade, it was a very simple trade. There was only basically two refrigerants. There was R12 was used for your refrigerator. R22 or HCFC22 was used for your air conditioners. There were some varieties, but that was 90% of the refrigerants. There was only two. Now, what they've done, you see the ODP, the ozone depletion potential. They took CFC R12, the most popular, and they made that the base. And they're saying that is its damage is valued at 1. You can see that the 22 is just half that. This is our new replacement that you'll find in refrigerators and cars. You see its ODP value is 0. So we thought that was great, and it was. But as we carry on, you'll see that that has its own problems. So I think we've been aware of some of these issues with the ozone. And I think that they thought that this was going to be over by now, and it's not. The ozone is not recovering as quick as they thought that it would. And some are saying that some of the developing nations are still using these old refrigerants and letting them go and blaming on them. I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know. But it's not over as soon as they thought it was going to be. Oh, I got to put here, I guess. So, along came in 1987, the Montreal Protocol. That was the start of trying to control these refrigerants and making them a controlled substance. And then we get to having a problem with global warming. And in the Paris Agreement in 2016, they started thinking about, well, this global warming thing is an issue now. We've got to work on that. So the Montreal Protocol, as I said, it controlled where the refrigerant came from, who was getting it. You had to document what you used and whatnot. And if you go to, when we first moved up here, used to go to the dump and you'd see refrigerators over in a pile, and you had to pay 35 bucks or something to drop them. They always had a tag on them. They always had a tag that says that the refrigerant had been removed. And one of my friends that works up here, he's not in business any longer, he's retired, but he had the contract to go and draw it all out and deal with it. Now, I don't know what's going on now, but I go to the dump, and I was just there last week, and I looked at a piece of refrigeration equipment, no tag. So I don't know what's happening, whether that's been forgotten or not
Still
looked after.
They just do it in batches now.
Do they? Okay, so do they ship them away
I think
someplace?
Kegel was doing it locally.
Okay, well, as long as it's looked
And then I
after.
think it gets scrapped.
Okay. As long as it's looked after, that's good. And we'll just flip ahead a bit here. So as we see, these global warming gases are, they want to get rid of them now. So the Paris Agreement was all about greenhouse gases, Kyoto Protocol, and mitigating all this. There's two things you'll see in any documentation with the HVAC business. The HRAI, the HSHRAI is ASHRAE, and you'll see that it's a nonprofit organization in the States mostly, and it has to do with organizing between the industry, the government, and scientists and whatnot, and basically advises and regulates some of the terms that and testing, things like that. And in Canada, we have the HRAI, and I'm taking this from their course. They're the governing body that, they're not really a governing body. They work with government and industry in a team. Now, this is part of this course, and this is really quite frightening. As you see, these refrigerants, these are the old ones I talked about, 12, 22, and 123 in red. These are olds from the 70s. And you see that the ODP values and their lifespan, it takes them a long, long time to break down. They're very stable chemical substances. But look at the global warming potential. It's huge. So then we switched over because we were so concerned about ozone depletion. We switched to these new refrigerants. So that's what's in your car. That's what's in your air conditioner, in your home. And these others may be used in industry. But you see, they've gone right to 0 ODP value. And their lifespan is less in especially these two cases. But look at the global warming potential. It's enormous. So if you let a pound of this gas go someplace, it's going to do a lot of damage. So now we're getting rid of these, and now we're going to. It's most of these refrigerants, these newer ones, they don't have chlorine in them. They finally got rid of that, and they've reconfigured it. I'm assuming people very smart are working on this kind of thing. And you see that this is actually, we just bought a new car, and that's the refrigerant in it, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think any car after 2021, the air conditioner will have this 1, 2, 3, 4 YF. And you see the ODP value is 0, the lifespan is very short, and the global warming potential is reasonable. So that's where it's headed for now, anyway. And you'll see that when a guy comes to work on your air conditioner or your heat pump or your refrigerator, he should have a recovery unit, and he's going to draw that gas out. It's going to be stored in a can. It's going to go back to the wholesaler and be disposed of properly. Okay. And it should have a tag on it. You should tag it like this. And you're supposed to keep records for 5 years.
May I ask a question? So, they draw it off, and they take it away and they put it in a can, and then they dispose of it properly. So
Yeah.
how is it?
I don't know. I don't know, Susan. I'm just assuming that, I think if I recall, there's a large depot someplace that all the wholesalers bring it to. And I don't quote me on this. I'm not sure if they burn it or they just, I don't know. I'm sure they have a way of dealing with it.
Hopefully they'll just.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't do that. No, that would be bigger than Trudeau going on a holiday. That would be huge if that ever got out. Because every HVAC guy in Canada has that equipment, and he's bound to do this or he's in trouble. So, and we're not doing enough. We are not doing enough, in my opinion, to control these things, but it is what it is. So anyway, so when you're going to look for equipment, of course, you've probably seen these Energy Star. Energy Star is good to look for. Energy Guide tells you, you've all seen these on your appliances and whatnot. That's kind of a good guide. With air conditioners or heat pumps, you're always looking at seasonal efficiency. That's the SEER rating, or the coefficients of performance. These can get a little bit confusing. So do your research, and I find a lot of things on, you just Google something, and next thing you know, you're on YouTube, and there's some guy who's got his thing going, and you have to remember that the more views he gets, the more he builds his brand, and so they're often selling something, even if they're just selling the information that they're giving. You can't always take it at face value. I'd like to think that if you're looking for information, government websites are generally very reliable, or even something like This Old House, that old show, PBS, they're very straightforward. And anyway, something to think about. My neighbor, now we would talk about refrigerant and how long it lasts. My neighbor at the cottage, he had an old refrigerator that he wasn't using in his bunkie, and he wanted to get rid of it. And I went and looked at it, and I said, "You can't get rid of this. I plugged it in and it worked." It's made by Westinghouse, 1936. I found out it works. The refrigerant that's in it is that R12. It's almost 100 years old and it still works. So that's how it's not exposed to anything else, because it's in a sealed system. And of course, in those days, they were built like tanks. And you notice that just like an old ice box, the refrigeration section was up on top. Whereas, most modern refrigeration systems have it in the bottom. But I guess they're replacing the ice cube with the electrical works up here. Anyway, so I have that in my basement. It was built in Hamilton, at the Westinghouse plant where my father worked. So how does I've always had people ask me, how's the heat pump work? But what do you think about heat pumps? And I try to explain it in the easiest explanation. So it's just like an air conditioner, only reverses. You've heard that, right? Well, that's how they work, but it's not really a very good explanation. If you lick the back of your hand like this, and then you blow across it, you don't have to do this, but I know you've all done it. What happens? It cools, right? You know what that is? Evaporation. Yes, that's the secret. That's the secret sauce of refrigeration. And when I asked how many people had a heat pump, you've all got heat pumps in your homes. They're all refrigerators or heat pumps. Okay, one way. So what's happening when the water on my skin, when I blow across it, I'm lowering the pressure, and that makes it boil quicker or evaporate quicker, and it absorbs the heat from my skin. So it's transferring the heat from my skin into the air. That's what's happening. And that's all that this refrigeration system is doing, except it's using refrigerant instead of water. Because refrigerant will boil at a very, very low temperature, -20, -50. So it's efficient at absorbing that heat. So in the if this was your refrigerator, in the evaporator coil, you can't make cold, you can only remove heat. So as the compressor compresses the gas, it shoots it out into the condenser coil, where you have a fan running, and it condenses into a liquid, a high pressure liquid. It gets to an expansion valve, which that's kind of a bad name for it. It's really just a restriction. It restricts the high pressure liquid, and at that point it changes state. It starts to change state as it lowers the pressure, and it changes and starts to evaporate. And as it evaporates, just like the water on your saliva on your hand, it evaporates, it absorbs heat. It goes back to the compressor, and this is the cycle. That's all it is. And everything that's a refrigerator works this way, basically. Now, we go on. You know what a BTU is? The British Thermal Unit. It's a measurement of heat. This is the, like I say, this is really the secret sauce. It's called latent heat, which makes this very efficient, this whole system. So 1 BTU is used to raise 1 pound of water through 1 degree Fahrenheit. So if you have an 80,000 BTU furnace, that's how much heat it's putting out. One of those BTUs would raise 1 pound of water through 1 pound or through 1 degree of Fahrenheit, okay? This is called, okay, so how many BTUs does it take to vaporize water? This is heat called the heat of the latent heat of vaporization. For water, it's 970 BTUs per pound. That's a lot. That's an enormous amount of energy to get it to change state.
That's why drying your wood is important.
Yes, it is.
Otherwise.
Yes, and they say even bring your wood in from outside. Even if you think it's dry, bring it into the house because it will still keep evaporating and it will burn quicker. It's actually, the wood isn't burning, the wood is turning into a gas before it actually ignites. So this latent heat is opposed to sensible heat. Sensible heat is you measure with a thermometer. Latent heat, it's a calculation that by test in the lab, they would keep on adding heat to this 212 degree water. It won't boil until it reaches a point where you've put enough energy into it to actually start it to boil. So, and to melt ice, the latent heat of fusion is 144 BTUs. Am I getting through? Does it make some sense to you that there's a difference between sensible and latent heat? Because it's the latent heat of vaporization and condensation. This change of state is where the energy is either picked up from outside your house and brought into the house through condensing in the heat pump, or taking it as an air conditioner from inside the house to go outside. So if you can imagine, I mean, in regards to the environment, once this icebergs are, this ice sheet in the Antarctic is it's not salt water, it's fresh water. And so it's taking, when it changes state, it's taking a lot of heat to do so. It's not just, it goes down a couple of degrees and we melt some ice. There's, it's unbelievable how much heat it takes for these icebergs to melt. And it's going to take just as much to make them again or to maintain them. So that's, I think, why I'm not really up on all the data, but I think when they talk about it being a point of no return, I'm sure that smarter minds than I have figured out that once we get to the point where we're just not going to be able to recover. So that's my environmental thing. And so you'll see a lot of these around, especially up here. These are called mini splits. And they've become very popular in Europe and Asia because they don't have ductwork, they don't have basements necessarily, so you can plop these on the wall, and they're actually very efficient and work quite well. This is more of a typical North American heat pump, air-to-air heat pump. It's raised off the ground because it will frost up and it will melt. It will go into a defrost, which is Achilles heel for heat pumps. And then there's ground source heat pumps. So now it's either water to water, or you can have so what you're doing is you're pumping water through the ground, grabbing the heat of the 55-degree water or dirt, and extracting the heat out of that water that's being pumped around. Glycol is that alcohol based, so it doesn't freeze. So you have another heat exchanger here that the heat pump is taking the heat out it and putting it into floor heat, or it could go into a ductwork system as well. Pardon?
Hot water heater?
Yes, you could use it for a hot water heater for sure. That's pretty much the presentation I've got that I stole from the HRAI and added a few things myself. If I can go back, does anybody have any questions?
So what's the relationship between the amount of electricity to heat this room with a heat as opposed to the amount of electricity used to heat this room with an electric baseboard heater,
Yes.
an electric furnace,
Yeah,
or the little square furnace thing that you buy from Canadian Tire?
right. Okay. That's a good question. There's some variables because with a heat pump, with electric baseboard heaters, that's straight resistance heat. You put 1 watt in, you get 1 watt of heat out. It's 100% efficiency.
Right.
When you're using a heat pump, you're transferring the heat. You're not making heat. You're not generating any heat. You're extracting the heat from outside and transferring it inside. And as the temperature goes down outside, naturally, you have less heat out there for it to grab. So it has to be more efficient and work harder to do it. It takes longer. But on a general, you're looking at instead of 1 kilowatt of heat per 1 unit of electricity, you can get up to 4 units of heat with the heat pump. And that'll vary. If it gets super cold out, you're maybe down to 2 or 3, but it's still double. Or if you have a ground source heat pump, they approach 5 or 6 units of heat. And one of the beauties of the ground source is that, or if you put a coil in the lake, you don't have to deal with the defrost cycle, which I'll talk about. So this is my equipment. I don't use it, but I like to show people it. And most people aren't impressed, but I it's too heavy now to get out of my basement, so I think it's going to stay there. And well, there it is, behind in the junk room. Anyway, and there's the dial. That's my furnace. I have a hybrid system. I installed it about 7 or 8 years ago, Pat, did we? So it's a high efficiency propane furnace. I think the efficiency is 97 point something. This was the top of the line that I could buy at the time from York. It's a good furnace, and anything that's high efficiency, but you can't buy a mid efficiency any longer in I guess in Canada. They all have an extra condensing coil in them to extract the last little bit of heat out of the fumes. Okay, because you see that the pipes are not steel pipes for the vent; they're plastic. And that's the same principle. They're grabbing the latent heat out of the exhaust fumes. And does anybody have a propane furnace? Well, underneath here, you'll have a coil, a stainless steel coil with fins on it. Make sure that it's really important with these that you keep your filter clean. Because if that coil gets plugged up, it's a big job to clean it and your efficiency goes down. So it's very important. I have like a 4-inch filter, pleated filter. And so there's my lines coming in for the heat pump. What have I got next here? Okay, so that's my outdoor unit. This is again, it wasn't the best I could buy, but I was a little bit cheap. This is still a good unit. It has 2 stages of operation. So the compressor runs at a low speed and a high speed according to demand. But it's much a conventional system as far as the technology behind it goes. It's semi-smart. Okay, I have one 400-pound or 450-pound propane tank. I have a wood storage here for a cord of wood, a bush cord. And I don't do anything else with the propane other than a barbecue. Yes.
So Gordon, this is part of your furnace?
Yes, that's hooked up to my, this is my outdoor unit that's hooked up to the furnace. Yes. This is my outdoor heat pump. And what else was that? What was, oh, so this is what I get by with for a year with basically one fill of propane. The heat pump, I estimate, does about, I'd like to say 75–80% of my heating, especially in this kind of weather. It's doing it all. But when it gets super cold, the heat pump will shut off, and my propane furnace will come on. The propane furnace has another use. It comes on when it goes into a defrost, because as this is running, that coil gets plugged up with frost. So it has to reverse and go into an air conditioning cycle, shut the fan off. And that's why I built this little guard here, because the wind comes off the lake. I don't want too much wind around my when it's going into defrost. And so it will melt the frost off of the coils, and then the system starts back up again. That's the Achilles heel of the air-to-air heat pump, is the defrost. Yes.
Would that not benefit from being in the sun?
No, surprisingly not. The solar gain on that would be minimal. I mean, it wouldn't hurt, but for my application here, it was better out of the wind.
Right.
Okay.
And that's an air to air?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So I'm just curious about the difference between your system and, let's say, the most efficient ones that are available, say from Mitsubishi.
Yeah.
We installed a Zuba Central Mitsubishi unit. How would it differ from yours? Because it's rated for being able to pull heat out at up to -30 for sure.
That's right. Yes.
And then it only kicks into an electric coil after -30
Yes.
to augment the system. What's the difference?
Well, we'll get to that, because the newer system that I just put in my studio is much like that. I don't like to recommend any particular brand, only that Mitsubishi and Fujitsu are traditionally the leaders in this technology. So there's technology in the newer ones now that there's a computer this big, there's a circuit board this big in my new one, and there's I'll just show you.
What's your electrical cost?
Electrical cost? Funny you should ask. I started in the new year. I got something called an Emporia tracking system for my hydro, so I can track the hydro use of all my appliances and items and whatnot. And have you got one?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if for anyone who's interested, we got a Mitsubishi because the government approved, right? Because we got a rebate.
Yep.
And my husband is also tracking the,
Yeah.
he's not here today to tell you the technical stuff, but he's tracking all the energy from hydro, because of course that's important to know how much, because we're on propane, and we still use propane for more than you do, Doug. We use it. It heats the water, it's the backup and barbecue. And we do have a propane stove that we don't use that much, like a insert. So anyway, but all that to say, we only got it in November. So it'll be interesting to see after a year, because definitely the propane kicked on when it was really cold, that few cold days. But otherwise, we are doing well in the sense that our propane usage has gone down. And yeah, so I just offer that because I know people are thinking, well, is it worth it, right? And they're going to concerned about how much their hydro goes up. And yeah, so we'll know better in a year, maybe, or like next fall, because we'll been through a whole year. And our house is the kind of house that even before we didn't have air conditioning. It's a bungalow, and I don't think we're going to need much air conditioning. So I don't know, and it's a 60-year-old house, so I think that will be a good example for people.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's my.
Good.
Gord,
Yes,
we put our geothermal in a year, November, so we've got an extra year. You know, I tracked in spreadsheet. We also have solar.
right,
I tracked my solar input, our hydro and our propane use prior to and
right,
subsequent to. And our hydro definitely goes up, but we don't have to pay the user's propane fees anymore, so we pay
Right.
zero propane.
yeah,
And we're saving about 20% from what we originally got. And that was partly because last year wasn't a good solar year.
Yes.
We've done better in previous years.
yeah. Yeah, the bottom, I mean, there's no getting away from it. Energy is what makes things happen. It just, everywhere you go, if you don't have energy, nothing's happening. And so it's expensive no matter how you cut it, no matter what you're using. And I'm kind of, we just got to try to make the best of what we can and in using as less as possible and choosing our poison, really. And if you can mitigate the fossil fuels, we won't be so dependent on things that, you know, we have no control over. So, yes, Tom.
I'm a dummy in this. Is this a green thing or a money saving thing?
Yes.
It's
Both.
it's both. It's absolutely both.
But possibly changing the propane or for
Right,
oil.
right.
Our hydro is very cheap right now. Is it saving me money in 20 years? Or is this something that is gonna cost me money? And it's good for the environment, but I'm gonna
Yeah,
pay.
no, I'm with you.
But propane has really gone up, right?
Eh,
Cost of propane, is it not unregulated? Whereas I think with hydro,
you know what,
we're not in a better position because of the rate of increase of the cost of fuel.
Hydro's got to explode price when everybody goes to vehicle.
Yeah.
So
I don't know about that. I'm not sure.
We pay $50 a month for hydro,
Yeah,
and half for years and will for a little while longer. Finally got changing to propane, the furnace is $6,000, I'm told,
yeah.
and then this is another however many dollars.
Heat
And
pump.
you have to dig a hole in your backyard or have a lake.
Oh, no,
I don't-
no, this is an air-to-air heat pump. Let me get on to my next, my new and improved. Because this is our house and that's the way we deal with our house. If I had to do this again, I would have put in, probably a Zuba Central.
And can you add it to your system or do we have to rip out the drywall and we'll put it all new?
No, it's just a furnace and an air conditioner kind of deal. Okay, there's just a pipe. There's a couple of pipes that go from this to the furnace.
Yeah,
That's it, just like an air conditioner would be, except that this is obviously larger to get more efficiency
yeah,
out
we
of
have a
it.
large house too, so,
1,300 square feet,
right.
and that's a 2-ton, 24,000 BTU heat pump. If I had to do it again, I maybe would put a 2.5 ton in.
But you can get different sizes based on your square foot.
Yes, yes,
So is this replacing the air conditioner?
yes. Oh, yes.
So you don't need air conditioning then?
No, it gives you air conditioning.
Wow, okay.
There's a rough idea of what the system change over the cost.
Well, we'll get to cost in a second. Okay. Because that's a sticky subject. But so this is my new toy. As I said, this is a hobby. This is a heat pump water heater. And I love it. I like the other stuff, but I love this. It has a little heat pump refrigeration system up on top, and it's a 50-gallon tank. And the coils, instead of going into the air, go into the hot water, go into the water to heat it up. And what it does is it's got a little fan in here and it's extracting the heat out of my basement. Okay? And heating my water. We have 3 people in our house. We don't run out of water. There is backup electric elements here, just like a standard water heater in case this fails, but I've never used it because there's an echo feature on here. You just push the echo feature and it runs strictly on the heat pump. And it is, I think, I mean, I can show you the graph of how much energy it uses. It's peanuts. And the bonus is, you can't see it, but there's a drain line comes out the back. Here, it goes over to my floor. It comes out of the back of it and it goes into a floor drain. It's dehumidifying as well. So I used to have a dehumidifier in my basement because it was always a little damp in there. It ran all year long. I don't need it any longer.
Is it standalone?
Yes, yes.
How many gallons, hot water?
50.
So the heat pump outside warms up your basement, and now this hot water.
Just,
heater is
it's
actually-
nothing's creating heat. It's just transferring it outside to inside and then into my water.
But then isn't this lowering your basement temperature?
Yes.
Okay.
You need to put this in a room that, you can't put this in a closet. You'd have to put it in a, I think they say a 12 by 12 room, mechanical room.
How warm is the room?
I think they say over 60. These are huge in the States. People put them in their garage.
But we'll have to build a garage if we don't know.
Well, you don't, you put it in your basement. The problem is people don't have basements here, so that's kind of an issue. Yeah. But it really, this was just great because this is on a 30 amp breaker. And if you know what a 30 amp breaker is designed to handle a 25 amp load, that would be a regular water heater. This thing runs on the heat pump, it runs at I think 6 amps. So it's 5 times less energy use.
All right, now you're kind of going. I have an oil-fired boiler, indoor heat, and the boiler runs at 165. And last fall, I read an article in the Plumbing and Heating magazine that made me start thinking, and I've been slaving heat off the boiler in the winter through a heat exchanger I made in the ceiling into my hot water heater, which is a 40-gallon electric hot water heater.
Okay.
And the price of oil doubled this past year.
Yeah.
So instead of $800 a tank full of oil, I was going to be paying $1,600, and I'm going through 3 of those a year. I said, no way.
Yeah.
And so I stopped and I started firing wood into the wood stove as much as I could. And in December, I read this article and it's talking about if you've got an old oil furnace or propane furnace and you go to a heat pump, add that to the system without taking the old one out, so that on those few days, 4 or 5 days that we get, that it goes down to -40, you can turn the old system on and dump a little bit of pollution into the air, but a little tiny bit compared to the whole season.
Yes.
And the rest of the time, the heat pump will totally handle it. And when I saw that, I thought, what if I could backfeed heat from my electric hot water heater back into the boiler, which I've done this year. And I'm saving $1,000 this year on last year's heating bill
Yeah.
by doing that. If I was to have a heat pump hot water heater.
Are you scavenging heat out of the chimney of your boiler?
No,
Oh, okay. So you're tapping right into the boiler water.
yeah, I'm heat exchanging through an inch and a quarter pipe that is in the ceiling with a 3/4 inch pipe going through it. So one has the loop pumping from
Oh,
the hot
okay.
water heater up
Okay.
through, the other one has the loop down
Yeah.
into the boiler. So I'm bringing the boiler up to 112 degrees instead of 165, but that's enough to heat the floor
Mhm.
up to around 97 degrees, which heats the bulk of out most of the time.
You could get, if you wanted to get away from the boiler, you could get a air to water heat
Yeah.
pump.
Right?
They're-
I was
They are,
looking into that.
yeah.
But the amount of savings that I've got right now,
yeah,
I'm looking at it and thinking, I've kind of got the best of all worlds.
yeah.
The reason, one of the reasons
Each
I was
individual-
going to that was because every 10 years, they make me change the oil tank. I
Yes,
can do that work myself. I know how to
Yeah,
do it.
yeah. I-
But they charge me to do that.
Oh, I know.
Because I don't have that piece of paper that says I can do it.
I-
I just have it in between my ears. So that feels rude to me. And so I wanted to get off oil for that reason as well.
Yeah. Oil was, a lot of people, especially in the country, would have oil tanks sitting outside. And they would rot and they would leak, and oil was cheap. cheap back in the 50s, 60s, and they would leach away, leach away, leach away. Sometimes they even buried the oil tank in the ground. And then someone would go and buy the property, and then somebody, inspector, would say, well, you've got to remediate all this soil. That's going to cost you $60,000. And then people would start throwing lawsuits around. And so they came with the same thing with the propane tanks.
It could be a trade,
Well,
the oil guy, because they were costing the insurance company money. They
Yeah, well,
made
yeah.
a trade.
yeah. Anyway, the cost is, I'm going to get to the cost yet. Right. So this is what I have on my studio. My studio is above a garage. This is a Fujitsu 2-ton unit. And there's something else that if ever you do anything with a furnace, a newer furnace, a air conditioner, a heat pump, anything like that, make sure that you put a spike protector on it. Because these things have computers in them, and 9 times out of 10, if there's a failure, it's because something cooked in the electronics. So I would never, I have one on my furnace, I have one on the other air conditioner, I have one on this outdoor unit, this heat pump. And I also have one for my whole house, protect TVs and things like that. Anyway, because we have a lot of fluctuations in our hydro. So this sits outside, and my garage and studio is upstairs. It's about 900 square feet downstairs and the same upstairs. And I heated it with propane, no more. This is doing it all. That's the one that's in the garage downstairs. They call these heads. There's a head, 1200 BTUs for the garage downstairs. And that's the floor mounted head for upstairs.
This is a mini split?
Yes, yes. So yeah, I have one unit outside, and it has the capability of supplying piping to 3 heads, but I've only got 2. 2 heads are better than 1, but 3 I didn't need.
What does that cost a year to heat the 1800 square feet? I know the garage doesn't have to be at 72.
I can show you on, so far I've started to log it. Every month I can see a difference. Last month, I think when it was really cold, February, it was $55. And I keep this whole building at 55 degrees all the time. When I go up to the studio, I turn it up and then I turn it back down. Okay. And this is really cool. It's got little, when this thing starts heating, the damper up there opens, this damper opens and it blows out. It's very quiet and it's nice heat. Yes.
Are all your pipes on the outside of your building or?
No, you'll see that when people install these, sometimes you'll see that these are the power pipes here. I'm sorry. The refrigerant pipes are behind. That's the hydro. That's the hydro coming in. That's the hydro going up to the heads. Because the heads are fed by this outdoor unit. The refrigerant lines, I ran them inside the wall. But sometimes you'll see them, they look like an eaves trough that goes up the wall, and that they'll put it on top of the piping to make it look neat. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to try to hide it, so I hid them.
What's that unit worth?
Okay, we'll get to
Oh,
that.
yeah, price me later.
That's the Emporia thing that I put on. It's a rat's nest, but all these little clamps clamp around the wires to measure the amperage that's being drawn by each individual circuit. And that's it. So as far as price goes, I'm not going to name any names, but you know, we all know that the government has a subsidy out for the green energy thing. And I've been through this with the trade so many times that government will come with a subsidy for either ventilating your home or, upgrading your insulation. Whenever they do that, you gotta know that the contractors know that. The manufacturers know that, so they know that you're getting back $5,000, $10,000. So they're gonna raise their prices, it's a little bit because they know that you're gonna get that, right? And so, but a lot of people don't like that. They say, well, that shouldn't be subsidizing, my tax shouldn't be subsidizing this new, for people that can afford it. But what it does do is it encourages research and development into new and improved equipment. And it makes the manufacturers change over their lines into producing something that's more efficient, because to meet the requirements of getting the rebate, you have to produce a piece of equipment that has a certain amount of energy savings, right? So it moves us along, and yes, it's almost always the more affluent that can afford this newer technology, but eventually it gets cheaper enough that the people like we can afford it. Does that?
So what sort of price range? Yeah.
Oh yeah, we gotta get to the point. Well, I do it all myself, okay? But for this system here, which is very, I'm really quite pleased with it for an air-to-air heat pump. I asked a local contractor to give me a price because I was curious at how much, because I hear so many people saying that can't get anybody, they're so expensive and all that. So I asked a local contractor to come out and price out this system for me. And I was willing to run the hydro out from my home here. So I said, all you didn't need to do is hang the unit, run the pipes, and hang the heads, 2 heads. And their price was, what was it, Pat? Was it close to $17,000? Almost fell off my chair. And I went to my wholesaler and I bought, and that was, and was taxes in?
I think it was 17 including taxes.
Yeah, okay, but that wasn't any hydro involved.
No.
I went to my wholesaler, taxes in was about $5,500.
Okay, so if I can just interject, we didn't do it ourselves. We had to upgrade our electricity, which I think cost about 5,000. I think it was, okay, I'm really bad at the numbers, but I think it was around 25,000. But with 5,000 over, that's down to 20,000. And we have, our house is about, I don't know, I think it's around 1,700 square feet. So we have a unit in the bathroom, a unit in the main room, and the main bedroom, and one of the next floor. But just I want to say, you have to get a audit done in order to qualify for the
That's right.
rebate. So the rebate, I think, was helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
it probably did push us towards this. We were saving for electric car, they don't always say, okay, let's do this. Anyway, but in terms of price, so I think, yeah, it was a big chunk of change, 20,000, but these rebates do help because people like us, we're retired and had to save that money. So it was helpful, but I don't know where to say. Yeah, we just had to do the upgrade of electricity, which not everyone will have to do. But the process took months, I had to come out and the auditor had to do it and the paperwork. But I think overall, I can do this because my husband did it. It was worth it, and I think we look forward to
these prices have really gone crazy, just like everything else, because there was supply and demand, chip shortage.
Yeah.
Worker, there was a shortage of people to do the work. So obviously, the people that are in business doing this, they're taking it. I don't need to. It's not fair to say they're taking advantage, but they're getting the most out of whatever's out there, right? I think the price is going to be. The price will come down, and the availability will come down. The only thing I want to mention is with these split systems, these mini splits. You can buy them on on
Amazon.
Amazon, and they come with a do-it-yourself kit. And I'm afraid I'm not too keen on that, only because of the possibility, if somebody who's doing this and doing it right, it will not leak. It will not leak. But if somebody is doing it themselves and they lose the charge, it's just going to go off into the atmosphere. That's not going to be good. They're not going to be able to go and buy more refrigerant themselves. They're going to have to call a professional to come, and he's going to charge you big time to put it back in order. And then with a lot of cases, a lot of this stuff is coming out of Asia and India. And not that they're junk, but they don't have quite the quality control, and they don't have the service backup. Mitsubishi and Fujitsu and some of the larger like York or Carrier, they have help. If you need something, they have people that are qualified, that have some training, and they'll more likely to do the job right. And if you need a part or service, you're going to get somebody. With the Amazon things, what people do, and I'm sorry to say, if it stops working, they're so cheap, they just throw it out and buy another. Yes.
The winter before this winter, my propane driver told me that he had trouble finding propane. He had to go to 3 places before he was covered. Is that, I don't know if that was a COVID thing. Is that going to be an ongoing issue?
Oh, I
Will be availability of propane?
I have no idea.
It's been going on for over 4 years now.
Really.
Some of the apartment buildings in town 2 years ago, they didn't have to heat for 2 days because of this deficiency of propane to be delivered up here. What I'd like to ask is, a guy had a backup generator, an older version one, and just because my car goes out and some propane or whatever. And I talked to the guy about putting in a new one. He goes, "Oh, I don't know if you want the new one." He says, "I put them in all sorts of cottages. When it goes to -32, the electronics in the new ones brings up and they don't work when you want them to go on." So what's the electronics in these things?
No trouble free. I had no trouble with either systems in the way of
Yeah,
electronics.
It's the unit outside that gets.
Yeah, yeah, never had problem. Yes.
I have to replace my oil tank by November, so I've been looking at a lot of different options. Have a good oil furnace now, but I really don't want to have it continue. So I've been looking at propane, not very comfortable with propane. I've been looking at the heat pumps, which are very expensive, you know.
Yeah.
And a number of people have suggested actually the electric furnace, which I was a bit shocked at not hearing, because I thought I'd have to pay a lot of money. But they explained to me that, you know, just it's only $7,000 for an electrical furnace.
Yeah,
They're very simple. You don't have
Yeah,
to pay the maintenance costs. And apparently your hydro bills are not anymore, you know, than you have to pay for propane or whatever. So I wondered what your thoughts were.
That's quite likely. With the cost of propane and oil, maybe a straight electric furnace might be somewhat comparable, but
The energy saving on a heat pump over a 10-year period, wouldn't that make
Yeah.
that electric furnace more expensive?
well, of course,
but it
yes,
takes-
because you're going to be getting 3 to 4 times as much heat out of it as you would a straight electric furnace.
Yeah, but a pair of socks is a lot cheaper than all of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's nothing wrong with it. That's
2,000 with extra hydro over 10 years, to equal the same cost of putting one of these in.
Right.
Good, you know, that's
Yes.
20,000, 25 in terms of your age, you know.
yes, I know.
Can you hook that?
I'm there.
Can you hook that electric furnace up to your existing, what you have in your house now? Or do they have to do all new?
You have to take out the oil furnace, put in you know, electric.
Electric
Can
furnace.
you also-
But your top one- Your
The
top
furnace runs
furnace.
on 110 and an electric furnace runs on 240. So that might make a difference.
Your duct work, you said.
Yes, you can, but I don't really recommend, like my hybrid system that you saw, it's all integrated. It's matched. Like I have a thermostat that knows what's going on outside. It has the thermostat knows what the furnace is doing. and they're talking to each other on a bus. And it's very cool. And it's smart, but not as smart as this system here. It talks even more. Yes.
Yeah, question from our chat room. Does it make sense to use a heat pump for a 20 by 20 detached garden, possible garden suite? A wood and electric furnace make more sense.
Oh, heat pump, a split system like this would be perfect. Yeah.
Question. You talked about air source, ground source, slightly touched on water source.
Yes.
Could you expand on that?
Well, rather than putting those coils in the ground, burying them 5 or 6 feet deep, you would take that plastic pipe and run it down to the lake or a river, as long as it doesn't freeze, and throw it in the lake. And now you would run a glycol, like antifreeze, with a pump through that coil, and it would pick up the heat from the lake bottom, which is about 50 degrees, maybe 45, and bring it back up into the house, and then the heat pump would extract the heat out of that 45-degree water.
Forty between ground and water, probably similar.
Yes, same idea, except with the water, you have more surface area, is a little easier to grab that heat. Yes.
Just wondered if anyone had any experience with a local company, Heat Line. They manufacture a product that's very similar to that. I think the line is called Limnotech.
Yeah.
Limneon.
Limneon,
They've sold
yeah.
that to somebody else now, but it's still available.
I think it went to someone in Germany. And, I'm sorry, yes.
Oh, I just wanted to say, yeah, it did get sold to a German company and we did look into it. I mean, it does seem, because it's got like a huge number of kilometers worth of
Piping and-
plastic tubing inside of a 4-foot or 5-foot diameter ball, which you anchor to the bottom of the lake. And so it is interesting, and I think it probably would be useful for a lot of folks who have easy access to lakes. But it would depend upon your shoreline and how deep and how fast and whether or not you can anchor it. I mean, it's got a number of different issues associated with that. But it is an interesting technology, and they did test it at Cushog Lake and used to be able to watch it real time in terms of exactly what, energy in and energy out and all that kind of stuff. But it has been sold. And when we were looking at a heat pump for the house, I did check again, and there's nobody selling it locally that I could find. Okay, and so was part of the problem. I couldn't get anybody to talk to say, okay, here's our circumstances. Maybe would it work here, and how much would it cost?
Yeah.
So it was a difficulty in terms of getting access to information about exactly whether or not the Limneon would work here, and if so, under what circumstances and what the cost would be. What I just on the cost side, because I think that this is really an important thing, is for us to be able to talk to each other as a community about what our experiences are on the cost side. And it is true that during the pandemic, there's been supply chain issues which have driven up the price. And I think it is also true that there's been an increase in price because of the availability of public subsidies. That some people taking advantage of that. I'm just thinking that one of the things that Environment Halbert might be able to do is bring back together more information with respect to the price experience that we're having. And maybe we could put on another event, if that would be helpful to people, that we could get into the weeds more deeply on the current costs and so on. Shirley and I put in a Zuba, what's called Mitsubishi Zuba Central System, which we have about 1,700 square foot place on Halls Lake. We put that in 2 years ago. And we also at the same time put in a water heater, which is very much similar to the one that Gord has. I think it might be a little bit bigger in terms of its capacity. But we put both of them in at the same time and applied for the Green Homes Grant to help us pay for it at the time. The whole thing, all cost in, all taxes and so on and so forth, was 22 minus the 5,600 we got back from the Green Homes Grant. So that's what our net was 22 minus 56 at that point.
When?
That was 2 years ago. Okay. And we used a local contractor and so on and so forth. I did none of the work myself. I don't want to do that. I want people to do it who I can then call up and say, fix what you didn't, have to fix it. I don't do any of this kind of stuff. So that's what our reality was. But I don't know what the current reality is, and I think that it might be useful for us to have a forum where people could talk about that. So maybe we can look at that as Environment Halliburton and go whether or not we can actually do something to facilitate that kind of up-to-date conversation.
Yes.
Thank you so much for what you just said. So I wanted to buy the Mitsubishi and I looked into what I would need and I would need an upgrade of the hydro. The people at Hydro One said, oh, it might be free, it might cost a couple of $100. The answer when I got in touch with the technician was, I had to replace the hydro pole, to do the upgrade, and the cost would be between $10,000 and $15,000. And it's just across a little road, I'm getting the service anyway. So it floored me, and the electrician who said he would then have to do the connections, or he could maybe tunnel under. It would be about 9,000. Wow. Oh my God. I know, and
Yeah, we deal with the services up here. There's no doubt about it.
For the room, right now, I'm paying about $5,000 a year for hydro.
Right.
Am I in the wrong room to save money? Is this just the way I should be doing it? Anybody? Yeah.
Each is individual. I mean, some places are built very energy efficient in their insulation values, the way they use the place, what your expectations is. With the heat pump, you cannot expect instant heat like you'd get from a furnace that's combusting things. The heat will generally be very soft and gentle and steady. This particular heat pump, the biggest difference is the compressor is a DC compressor and it's variable rate. So instead of the compressor, when that in the older one, the 2-stage I have, when that compressor starts, it draws about 5 or 6 times the amount of electricity to get running. Okay, like you hear the lights dim sometimes when something comes on. Well, the split system with the new technology, that compressor is actually a DC motor and it will ramp up slowly, 10%, 20%, 30%, smooth and quiet. The bearings last longer, all the components don't shake and shiver and pound. Your hydro is very smoothly coming up. It's a big difference, yes. And you know what? We're so far behind, I think, in Germany and Europe, we think we pay a lot for energy, but in Germany and Europe, they are just unbelievably taxed with high energy costs. And they have, I understand that in Germany, when you build a house or when you retrofit a house with energy savings, they come around and they actually gauge your house on how, give it a value because it has a certain amount of energy use that makes it more sellable. And you know, whereas we value flooring and granite countertops and I'm not saying it's wrong. It's nice to have those things, but we don't generally value a house by its mechanicals or its insulation values, and I think we need to do that.
Or its future.
Yeah.
Well, and I understand, sorry, just to jump in again, about Europe, that 66% of the homes in Norway, which has a cold climate,
Yeah.
are heat pumps, and there's huge incentives. I mean, yes, there's the 5,000 federal, but there could be more, like, in terms of incentives, because, but I just wondered, is there not, and maybe you know this, Terry, but is there not a $40,000 loan-interest loan that?
There's actually an interest-free loan, $40,000 from the federal government under the same kind of program, the Green Homes program. But, you know, I mean, you still have to pay back the principal, and a lot of people can't afford to take on another $40,000. So I think that we need to pay some attention to the affordability. You're asking really some affordability questions.
Absolutely.
And that's really important for us to pay attention to, because if we're gonna electrify everything, which is now the principal solution to the climate crisis, is to get off of fossils. how many people can afford to do it, and how much are we gonna help each other?
Right.
You know, get there, because we shouldn't be leaving anybody behind, and people should not be having to make choices, it seems to me, about whether or not to participate in trying to solve the climate emergency because of our ability to pay. Because we're all in this, we should be all in this together. So between the reality that we're currently facing and the choices that you're making, or the market's having to face, we gotta figure this out in terms of, you know, are there ways we can help each other get to where we need to go? Or are we all on our own? If we're all on our own, it's gonna be a very hard, you know, transition, it seems to me. So we need to figure out ways in which we can support each other. And one of the ways we can at least do is support each other with information right now. Like, what's the best way to go ahead? What's the best advice that you can get in order to solve the problem in the circumstances that you're in?
Yeah, that's why.
You know, and what do we need to do collectively to try to move the yardsticks politically? Okay, because we can't just deal with this by ourselves.
I agree.
You know, we need to have support, and that means we need to have public programs that help get us where we need to
And
go.
basic knowledge, because a lot of us are dummies, we don't know this.
Well, yeah, why should we know? Why should we be in the weeds and understanding and put all those nests that Gord does? I mean, I don't have time to do that stuff, and I don't have the capacity to do it, but you know, the Gords of the world and other people locally should be able to provide us with the advice that we need to make the best decisions in the circumstances that we're faced with,
Right.
and then try to change those circumstances as we go forward.
When you sell, do you take all that with you? No.
What take what?
All your toys.
It's with the building.
Yeah.
You're selling that benefit to the bill,
I
to
think.
the next person.
I'd be selling the benefit to this, but most people won't recognize it as a benefit.
No,
That's what I was getting at. But if I had granite countertops and a hot tub and that, they'd say, well, sign up. Yes,
Two things. One, political that Terry was mentioning. My baby brother out in Vancouver. Vancouver is promoting heat pumps
Yeah.
like crazy,
yeah.
right? And so on top of the federal grant, I think there's 10,000 provincially as well. So that's politically one of the things that's happening, and you can see that being pushed forward. And he switched to a Mitsubishi. We don't yet have the numbers out on it. As a very side component, you mentioned that you have one bush cord
Yes.
area to add wood heat, and that is something that we around here have an advantage of. And I'm just going to mention, this isn't to do with heat pumps, but it's supplementary heat that I think a lot of us do supplement our heat with wood. We purchased an Italian wood stove for $3.5 grand. It's 89% efficient. We have heated the house exclusively with that cook stove. Our hydro bills have dropped 33%. Our wood consumption has dropped 22%. So there are alternative things that you can add to the system too.
That's great. You know, it unfortunately, it costs money to save money. And you gotta kind of balance it out. So
Yeah.
I think, is there any questions or? Yes.
I would do the rate.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Totally programmable. They're totally programmable for the climate. No, they usually come. Even the one for my home has a thermostat that you can program for time of use. You know,
Yeah, I have like a nest on my whole home. right
Yes,
now.
yes. I think in the future, what we're going to have, because these compressors can vary the output, we're going to have what they have in commercial systems, more zoning. So if you have a 2,000 square foot home, wherever you are, that zone is going to be fed with just enough heat for when you're in there. They'll have occupancy sensors. So when you walk into the room, it starts to learn where you go, like your nest. It'll be taking an extra level there, and it will just warm. When you go to bed at night, it'll just keep the bedroom, because it can run at that 10%. and just feed a little bit of heat just to keep your temperature at 70 degrees. The rest of the building can go down to 50. And I think that's going to be a way, the next step. But of course, that means more gizmos and gadgets and expense, but
Amazing, I can feel the heat.
yes.
I wrote down that I would do to 4 meter deep that, you would be putting a heat pump in the ground. What is the footprint?
That depends on your capacity needs. Yes, the bigger house would need more, and that would have to all be calculated out. They would tell you how much flow you'd need and how big the pipes would be. That would all have to be calculated out.
When I first bought my house, they had a program, in the early 2000s. And, you had an audit.
Right,
And you, as at some certain point, they tell you the option, but, and the sort of percentage value of it going towards the rebate,
right.
but in the end, the auditor got more than I got, because she had to come twice to check it and then check it afterwards.
Right,
And I got $100 back, and I had spent $8,000.
yeah, that's not a very,
So I really want to be cautious on it.
yeah, I understand. Yes, sir.
Even if you're using a heat pump, you still need a backup.
Well, I believe in diversity.
Yeah.
I don't have a backup for my studio. I'm quite confident that this new system is going to handle it and be reliable. But my house, I have a wood stove, and so I haven't had any problem, touch wood. But if I did, I know that I could survive with the heat pump. Yes.
One last question from our online folks. We started this discussion with several people in the audience saying that once their heat pump life cycle ended, that was kind of the end of things. Many people didn't choose to do the heat pump again. What's the lifespan of a heat pump bought today?
Well, I think if you choose a good brand, a reputable brand, and you get it, I don't believe you need to have it serviced every year, but you have to kind of keep an eye on it, make sure that it's functioning properly.
Do you see the
I don't see
technology
the-
changing
Yeah,
significantly
yeah,
in the next 5 or 10 years?
I think this is just an opinion. I think they're almost at the peak for air-to-air heat pumps. I don't think they're going to be able to squeeze any more out of this. Maybe a little bit, but I think they pretty much reached with this technology. That's hard to say.
What's the lifespan?
Well, I think 15, 20 years. Yes.
Here's a water heat pump for heating domestic hot water from outside air.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have them?
Oh, yes.
And are they?
Yeah.
Are they durable and efficient and so on and so forth?
I'm afraid I don't know very much about them, but I know they're available. It's an air to water heat pump, and you could use that to heat underfloor heating or heat your domestic hot water.
You had a hot water heater, would you share what that cost? I mean, Terry said.
Yeah, I think it was $1,800, Pat,
That's what I was gonna say.
whereas your standard electric water heater would be around $9,000. So it's almost double. But I believe the payback is about 3 years.
I'm also looking into metering. The solar panels
Okay.
hooked up to the hydro system. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't have any experience with solar. No, I'm sorry.
I just to mention, in terms of the rebates, we couldn't get a rebate putting this in the garage in the studio, because that's not our main residence.
That's right.
And Gord also talked to one of our neighbors just to give them some advice, and that's their cottage.
and it's not available, it has to be your principal residence to get the rebate.
Which makes sense.